I'm going to start this tutorial. This is an addendum to my tutorial I made in November of 2020 on putting together animations, solar animations, how to take a number of frames of an area and then put them together over time to show the movement in an animation. One of the issues that I run into, particularly with animations that involve surface details on the sun, is that since you're recording a number of AVIs over time, 30 minutes, an hour and a half, as the sun rises, the intensity of the light increases. So it tends to change your histogram over time, which causes your animation to brighten. So for instance, starting off, this is an animation I did a couple of years ago and had not adjusted anything, but you'll notice where the histogram is in the first frame. And if we go to the last frame, you notice it brightens over time, so that by the time the end of the animation comes, it's brightened quite a bit, and it shows in the animation that when you run it, it starts out dark, and over time it starts to lighten, which is not a major problem, but you'll notice it is when it goes back to the beginning, you can definitely see the change. So myself and a few others that this frustrates been looking for a way to take care of this, and I had seen a tutorial by Chuck on Chuck's Astrophotography where he uses PixinSight rather than Photoshop for putting his animations together, and he had mentioned that you can balance the histogram. He just didn't go into it on that, so I thought I'd do that here to show everyone how that works, how you can take an animation and balance the histogram and using PixinSight to make it the same throughout the entire animation. So I'm going to pause. In order to do this, I'm not going to go through all the steps, but for those of you that put animations together using capturing by auto stacker, processing and IMPPG, and then utilizing a program such as Photoshop to put your animations together, I'm going to go through the steps that I found you can take in order to balance the histogram. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is where I've brought all of the files in, loaded them as layers. To do that, you go into Scripts, File, Scripts, load files into Stack, that you go and choose all of your processed files and bring them into a stack into Photoshop. And I suggest you get all of your frames aligned and cropped to begin with. Makes it easy for this next step to do. So once you've got them aligned, cropped, you've set up pretty much your animation ready to go, and you've noticed this from dark to bright. In order to get that histogram balanced, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to export layers to files. In other words, we want to put them out there so that we can put these into PixinSight to adjust. So I'm going to select layers to files. I'm going to set up my folder that I need. I've always got a folder labeled Sun. So I'll add a new folder and we'll do PI adjustment frames. I don't need a name profile on it. It's going to come out as a TIFF, and we just hit run. And this takes about a minute, depending upon how many frames you have. It's going to run these and put them out as individual frames. There it's taking the frames and putting them into that folder. And of course, if you have a lot of frames, it will take longer. I did this just recently with a 180 frame animation, and this step going into PixinSight next really made this simple to take care of. So I used a shorter animation here to speed things up a little bit. And it's done. And we're going to close this out now because I'm going to use these new frames once we get this done. So now I'm going to move over to PixinSight. If you're not familiar with PixinSight, it's a very strong processing engine, particularly for those that do DSO imaging, dark sky object imaging. It was developed a number of years ago. It does have a steep learning curve, I will say. Those that really understand it love it. I have difficulties with it because it can be complicated. There are a lot of books, videos out to use it, and really it's more aimed for DSO processing than solar, but it really comes in handy for this particular issue that we run into. So if you're familiar with PixinSight, the script that we're going to use is under batch processing, and it's batch linear fit. And it'll bring up this box, and we're going to go add those frames that we want. And we select all the frames to bring them in. And now I'm going to choose a reference image. The reference image will be one of the images in this animation. And what I did was I'm going to pick like the middle frame. So I got 41 frames. So I'll probably go to like the 20th frame, which that'll be like the midpoint. So that will bring up the brightness in the darker frames and bring down the brightness in the brightest frames. Use that kind of as a set point. You can do however you want to. If you want to bring them all down as dark as the first one is, you can choose that as the reference frame. Or if you want to bring the other ones up to the brightest frame, that's all up to you. But I'm going to go pick out this one. So we've got 40 frames. So we've got 8, 12, 16, 17, 18. So I'm going to choose this frame as my reference frame. I'm not going to play with these. I'll put on here show images while processing. The only thing that does is it shows how it changes the image, which is kind of nice. And the output extension, PixinSight puts this out as an XISF file that PixinSight reads. Photoshop cannot read this. So we're going to change this to TIFF. And we'll put an output directory under PI adjustment frames. I'll put adjusted. Select that folder and say OK. And now it's going to run. As it does this, you'll start to see the images start to pop up. And you'll see it adjusts them, where it's brightening up those darker ones. As it adjusts the histogram, it balances the linearity of each frame. You'll see that the adjustments get less and less as it gets close to the reference frame. Of course, if you got 180 frame animation, this takes a little bit more time. We're only using 40 frames here, so we'll start to see it changing them to where it will start to darken some of the brighter frames. And that's done. No, we're done here. We're going to go back to Photoshop. select File, Scripts, load files into Stack, go find that folder, and if this works right, go back to Sun, adjusted frames, and there they are. Select all the frames, bring them in. They're already aligned, so I don't need to attempt to automatically align source images. So I'm just going to click OK. And of course this takes a few minutes as it loads the frames. And if we watch the histogram here, you notice it's not changing. It's staying right there. This will take about a minute or so. I should have music playing during these times, but okay. So it has loaded all those frames back up. We'll bring back up the timeline, create our frame animation, make frames from layers. Of course, those of you who have done this before, you know when Photoshop does this, it puts them in reverse order. So we need to reverse the frame so it's in the actual direction it's going. And now, when this runs, the brightness doesn't change. The histogram stays the same. It's balanced now. So if we look at the first frame and the last frame, they have the same histogram now. Pretty simple, pretty easy. From here, you can export your GIF. This wasn't the best example to use, but it shows the technique fairly easy. So hopefully you'll find this quick tutorial a little beneficial.